Welcome to our hit show, A Travel Talk Show with James of Island Innovation and a lot more, as we just told you a little bit about our friend here, James, coming us from across the Atlantic. James, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me on board. Excited to at least virtually be in Canada for an hour or so.
Excellent. And we've honored the island innovation philosophy with our screen background here. Put a little island in there. We got a little James Island Innovation in respect of all the good work that our friend here, James, does. So, James, I'm gonna jump right into some of the questions. I'm sure our listeners are going to be very excited to hear what you have to say. You have a very unique niche that you're working with. The success is obvious through all the research that we've done. So, maybe what, James, we should start with is if you could tell us a little bit more about who is James and the upcoming Virtual Island Summit that you got going that we are here in Canada at ehCanada signed up for. Maybe you can give us a little background into that.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on board. And Island Innovation started, I guess, just to give you a bit of the backstory. I was very lucky enough to have the experience working in the Pacific Islands and then in the Caribbean. My background was renewable energy, but broadly on sustainability topics. Came back to the UK and actually did my master's in island studies, believe it or not, in the far north of Scotland, which essentially was a rural development degree, but specifically focused on the islands in Scotland. And what was fascinating to me was not having actually much experience in the Scottish Islands, but having a lot more in the Caribbean, how similar the conversations I was having there were. You know, there's a lot of obvious differences between the Caribbean and Scotland, but things like energy costs. Caribbean islands pay anywhere from 3 to 5 times more for that electricity than people in Florida pay, despite the fact that the islands have a much lower average income. In the UK, the proportion of people, the places with the highest level of energy poverty, which we define as, I think, 20% of people, 20% of income being spent on heating your home, are for various reasons in the Scottish Islands. So there's these energy factors. There are things like, well, how do you dispose of waste in a small island? What do you do when you're dependent on tourism and that's your major source of income? And obviously, like this year, that suddenly stops coming in. How do you cope with outward migration and a large percentage of people leaving? And so it was really interesting for me to see those parallels. And so for me, Island Innovation was about creating what I like to call digital bridges between these far-flung places around the world. Obviously islands, but we're not strict on that definition. You know, there are small towns in the middle of Canada that might have a lot more in common as a rural, remote place with some of these islands as well. So digital bridges between far-flung places all around the world that really we've been able to build more recently with the huge advances that we're making on communications, that just every year things are becoming better, and so we couldn't have really done this 10 years ago. The second is involving islands regardless of their political status. So, you know, you obviously have independent countries like Barbados or Fiji. You have provinces or states like Hawaii and Prince Edward Island. You maybe have municipalities within larger islands or within larger places, or overseas territories like some European and the United States has as well. How do they interact with each other and share useful information? Like, as I said, they might have a lot in common. And then thirdly, the different sectors. You know, to build a sustainable future, you need government, but you do need the private sector. You need universities and research. You need NGOs and development institutions as well. But often these types of organizations just talk different languages and don't know how to work with each other. So the idea is to build this really big net. And we started the Virtual Island Summit last year to really involve all these different stakeholders and have a place to do that. And the realization was, if we tried to do a physical event, it would be very difficult to have the level of diversity that we wanted in the room. And so, funnily enough, September 2019, we decided to invest in a virtual summit, not knowing how important that would be this year. And we had 4,000 stakeholders join us last year from islands all over the world to share their experiences. And this year, same again in September. You go to virtualislandsummit.com to sign up. you can join, and we're on track for 10,000 participants this year from islands all over the world, including the Canadian islands. But hopefully, we'll have a even stronger Canadian representation after this.
We're gonna do our best to get you in front of 52,000 islands here in Canada. So we'll see what we can do here, because there's a lot of good work. One of the questions I got with that little segue is, do you find that how difficult is it getting all these different stakeholders together when they're all they're a lot of times, in our experience, they're all thinking on a different track? How do you get them to get on that one track?
Well, I wish I won't say that we've solved that problem. If I had, I think I'd be laughing all the way home. But no, it's definitely difficult. We're still trying to figure that out as well. Sometimes I feel like we almost play a role of translator, talking with these different institutions and just having the knowledge of where people are coming from and being able to put the right language in front of people is a useful start. But for example, in our sessions in the Virtual Island Summit, we try and make sure we have in every session, in terms of speakers, a private sector representative, an NGO representative, a government representative, to give those different angles. So if we're talking about electric vehicles, exploring how each of those sectors are approaching that specific issue of electric vehicles, and what the challenges and motivations are for each of those. And often the goal is the same. People want the same thing, which is more electric cars. Yeah. But getting there, each has their own concern, and sometimes the conversations aren't necessarily aligned. So I think we aren't solving everything with this, but I think just getting those stakeholders to talk to each other sometimes and to have a little bit more understanding and empathy for each other is a useful start.
Yeah, that's a good point. So James, you've lived, worked, and traveled, and correct me if I'm wrong, like 60 countries you've done, in all continents except the Antarctica. So you have been to our Arctic, but you haven't been to the southern one. Our team just concluded a 10-year study similar of over 1,000 small communities here in Canada, including over 6,000 different heritage sites and parks. And one of the things that we really got out of our 10-year study was you really get to connect with that front line, and you really get to understand some of the hidden challenges and the opportunities that our small communities of Canada face. So my question to you, James, is how much of an impact were your travels, and I know we touched on it a bit, in the development of the Island Innovation Company? Like how big of an impact, or was it an eye-opener? Like, how did that all come about?
Well, I'm very fortunate in the way that I've built up my business, but my whole career really has been location independent. And I guess I'm part of that new wave of people that has just been able to live completely virtually in a way, or work completely virtually, because the technology is at a point now where you can. And last year people kind of thought about that as something a bit novel, a bit out there. And it's funny how quickly things change, because now everyone's working from home, and all of these big companies that never would have evolved to do that slowly, because they've been forced to, and they've made this decision. They've actually said, oh, wait, why are we spending all these money on offices? Let's keep everyone staying at home. And so what that meant for me was that I was not tied to living in suburban England and working from there, but was able to spend time in the communities I wanted to work with, whether that's in Scotland or the Caribbean, and have that flexibility to stay 6 months, 6 days, whatever made sense. And part of that was a financial benefit. It's cheaper to live in the Caribbean sometimes than it is in the UK, which and when you can live in either of those, and work from either of them, then it's not a difficult choice. I think a lot of British people would think. When the main reason that people often wouldn't live in these places is because of the lack of job opportunities, and that's changing. And this really coincides with the type of work that you do as well. And I'm sure you're seeing this in Canada, that this is, I think, a huge opportunity to revitalize rural, remote, isolated communities, because people who maybe wanted to stay but were forced to leave because there were no opportunities can now stay, but also people can now move to those, and we're seeing that now in some of the Scottish islands. It's a slow trend, but I think COVID and the pandemic is going to accelerate this now because there are even more remote opportunities. That if you can live in one of the Scottish islands, which is cheaper maybe to live in, beautiful scenery, safe, potentially bilingual education in some areas as well with Gaelic. There's a lot of benefits to living in those areas, and so why wouldn't you? And so I think for me it was a natural thing, and that has really impacted the way. I mean, our whole team at Island Innovation, we have a team of 8 staff, all in different countries, and we were working remotely before. And for me as an employer, that gave me access to the best talent around the world, regardless of location, and all the benefits of having people in different countries as well. So it's interesting to see the direction that we're heading in, but I think for me it's fascinating to see the applications that this has for rural, remote, and island communities.
Yeah, and in here in Canada, we're really noticing that too. Because again, and kudos to you, because we live that same lifestyle. We're remote. We've always been remote. Because of COVID, we've delved into different types of formats, different types of content. But it's true now. And the one thing, and maybe you can give us some insight on this, is one of the things that a lot of us who work on a remote sort of system. And it's the same old thing. I mean, we can go to some beautiful scenery. You can get a cottage on the river. You can get a cottage on the ocean. You can get a vacation home. We move around wherever it takes us. But one of the things that we are finding in the remote and small is internet connectivity. This is a huge concern. If we had proper internet connectivity from coast to coast to coast, I think we would have a whole different living lifestyle here. The one thing that's stopping a lot of the corporates or entrepreneurial endeavors that are trying to be grown here, and they're being sort of forced into the big cities because 200 kilometers up, basically 250 kilometers, 300 kilometers up from the U.S. border, internet is brutal. Do you find this in a lot of countries that's a big stopping gap?
I think that's the biggest indicator of economic development now. Economic growth is your internet connection.
Yes.
The fastest internet speeds in Europe are in the Faroe Islands. So the Faroe Islands is able to do that because they're an autonomous nation within Denmark. So they kind of have the Danish state, but they're completely independent, 50,000 people, and they were able to invest in that. Another example of this is Taiwan. In Taiwan, they have a law that is a human right to have high-speed internet. So their mountain villages, their smaller islands that are off the coast, of which there are several, all have as faster internet as there is in Taipei, and so they prioritize that.
Yeah.
In England, that's something that we've really struggled with in the past, is that the government has prioritized high speed internet in the cities, and the rural communities have really lagged behind that. But yet in Scotland, there have been specific government schemes so that some of those islands have really high speeds. Not all of them, but there are some islands that have really good connectivity. There's another really amazing project in the Republic of Ireland, the island of Ellsmoor, which has the fastest internet speeds in the Republic, which are only 400 people. But that was almost done as a demonstration project to show the possibility is there and that people can move there. So that investment does need to be made. And I think what we're also seeing now is with the rollout of 4G and soon 5G, that those connections are a possibility. Okay, an expensive one, but actually we have decent high-speed wireless internet in a lot of places as well. And I think this, yes, it's still a problem for some places, and those places that have good internet are going to accelerate really quickly. But what I hope we'll see over the next few years is just this prioritization, this realization that actually, if there's one thing you're going to invest in, don't bother investing in roads, invest in internet connection. It's far more important.
Yeah. And are these places that you've given examples, are they seeing more of a boom? Are people moving there to work remotely? Is there an increase?
I think it's difficult to say at this point. There has been an interest. There was this kind of in 2019, 2018, when these things were kicking off. There was an interest. Some of that was the staycation. So Ellsmoor in the Republic of Ireland, they were hoping to either attract islanders to move back, or to attract people, maybe even if they're not going to live there permanently, to come for 3 months instead of a weekend and stay there. And there was an increase in that. And obviously, with an island of 400 people, you don't have to attract that many people to make a big difference to the local economy. But the idea is, if people are staying longer, not only they're going to spend more money, but also they'll get more involved with the local community. And hopefully, if they move there, they'll actually, if they're actually living there, paying taxes there, sending their kids to the school, that will have a benefit as well. So I think there has been a trend. The difficulty previously has been that most employers still don't trust people, or still did not trust people to work remotely. And so obviously we're in this weird zone now where we don't know what's happening next week, let alone next year. But my prediction is that a lot of these companies are going to now have realized that they can let people work from home. They can trust people to do that. And so more people who maybe wanted to do this but couldn't figure out how to get their job right will now move home. And I think part of it for a lot of companies was maybe they saw the benefit of doing it, but they were worried about their clients maybe not trusting a company or that was working from home. But I think this has just been a mentality change. And it was something that was happening incrementally that has just been accelerated this year by the pandemic.
Yeah. And it's so true. The pandemic has really opened up the where internet connectivity is huge. I mean, we saw it with our here in Canada, they were trying to put online schooling. And the problem with that whole system was people didn't have enough internet to do it. It was too regionalized and went to the big city. So yeah, it's a big thing, and I agree with you. If we focused on high speed internet that's coast to coast to coast, I think over a period of time we would see a vast spreading of the population, because remote working is here to stay, in my opinion, because we've just got a huge dose of it, and we've sort of convinced ourselves through COVID that it can work and it has to work. And there are some things that are sort of waking up the world here on how we can minimize our cost as a company. You don't need to spend $30,000 now to go to a business trip in the community next door. You can do it on Zoom and have a lot more people impacting it, save a lot on your bottom line. Right?
Yeah, definitely.
So we understand that each region is different, and that's very apparent here. We're a huge country. I'm fortunate. I've done quite a bit of traveling, which I attribute to a lot of the education. But however, and it's sort of putting you on the spot, but if we could, in general terms for our audience, what are some of the challenges for island communities when it comes to sustainability, energy, and climate? What are some of the biggest challenges are you finding?
I mean, a general challenge kind of across communities has been this energy provision. So providing reliable electricity. And so you even had islands in Scotland until recently that would only have electricity for 8 hours of the day because it was so expensive. And so a big difference on your development trajectory as an island is if you have a cable to the mainland or not, because that vastly affects how you can do things. And 10, 15, 20 years ago, it was almost always more economical to put in a cable. Not almost always, but if the island was big enough, it was often more economical to put in a cable. The economics of cables are reducing now because you have renewables. And so solar energy, wind energy for many islands, wave energy to a point, but definitely nowhere near as much as solar and wind, are offering these opportunities. So Orkney in the far north of Scotland, which is where I studied that master's that I mentioned before at the University of Highlands and Islands, they had a cable installed, decades ago from the mainland, and that was designed to take energy generated in mainland Scotland to Orkney. Now, guess what? That cable these days is sending electricity in the opposite direction because Orkney generates far more than it consumes with its wind, particularly, but also wave. And so this is where you get a big difference between, say, islands that may be parts of a larger country or independent islands, say like the Caribbean, that are a single country that obviously have an isolated grid. But for me, for the Caribbean, one of the biggest barriers to development has been energy. Some countries spend anywhere, I think Jamaica spends around 10% of its GDP on importing fuels. In Guyana, that's 30%. So these countries are spending huge amounts of money on importing fuels. How can your manufacturing be effective if your energy cost is 4 times higher than Florida? No way. Even if your wages might be lower. So yeah, anyway, I say all that to give this idea that one of the big transitions has been energy and electricity, and renewables has really changed that.
Mm-hmm.
Another one we kind of already talked about was when you're a small island, having kind of enough of a market to make a business viable. And so the internet communications is really changing that, allowing people to reach more people
Mm-hmm.
and offer services digitally in some cases. And then obviously climate change is a big one. Varies a lot according to region.
Yeah.
In the Pacific, the concern is for the many atoll nations like the Maldives, also in the Indian Ocean, to an extent the Bahamas in the Caribbean, but these islands that are maybe 2-3 meters at most above sea level. There's the very kind of obvious symbolic sea level rise and the fact that those islands could disappear. And that's the one that often catches people's emotions and catches people's attention because it's so obvious. What less often, the connection people often less make is, say, the hurricanes in the Caribbean. Well, they are, the ultimate risk there is that they're going to be more frequent and more stronger every year because of warmer seas, the way that they're created. And a lot of these islands that maybe are at risk of disappearing completely probably would become uninhabitable before they disappear completely anyway, due to increased storm risk, more higher aridity, the lack of rainfall. So climate change clearly plays out very, very differently. If you're in Greenland or Iqaluit, you're going to have a different perspective of the impacts of climate change. And so those it's a global problem, but then the way that plays out locally is very different. But there's obviously two sides of that. One is adaptation. This assumption, well, climate change is happening. I think we have to take that stance, unfortunately. Climate change is happening on some level.
Yep.
What are we going to do to prepare for that and to make sure that we're ready for the implications of that? And then the other side being mitigation. Okay, climate change is happening, but how can we reduce our outputs as much as possible in order to reduce that? And sometimes I think the burden of mitigation gets unfairly put on islands. The idea of reaching 100% renewable sounds really nice. It's a nice marketing stunt, but actually the economic optimum right now, and this will hopefully change to get closer to 100, but for most islands is maybe 50 to 80% renewables. So for me, it's not about going 100% renewable just so you can have that nice round number. It's about the economic optimum to make the lowest cost for people living there, who already are bearing the brunt of a lot of these issues. And the big players, I mean, the US needs to step up, China needs to step up, India needs to step up, and the European Union needs to, and Canada also. But I mean, particularly the lack of leadership from the United States has really damaged, I think, global commitments on climate change, because when the US pulled out of the Paris Agreement, other countries said, well, why should we do it if they're not doing it? And it really jeopardizes the whole progress that was being made, however slow that was. There was progress.
Yeah. And that was a big turning point when the U.S. pulled out, and they sort of basically restructured their whole climate change, renewable tourism structure. Everything's been totally a 360. So it has thrown, being a neighbor, I'll tell you right now, that it has thrown some big obstacles, some big challenges our way. Some of the decisions have been very challenging for not only the Canadian public, but also for our politicians that are sort of getting the big brother sort of bullying tactics coming our way. So, we got to handle. But one of the positive things, and please tell me if this is fake news or not, because I can't fly over and figure this all out. But isn't there a couple countries and regions around you that are 100% renewable?
Well, I think one of the promising things was, just quickly going back to the US with this, is the federal government has let everyone down, but cities and states have been stepping up.
Yes.
And so you see that in many cases, and in some cases it has been a commitment to 100% renewables, but there've been a variety of commitments, all of which have different levels of meaning. And so I think what was promising for me in the US was that cities and states were stepping up to make their own commitments for this. There have been various other places that have reached 100% renewable. Often they are islands because you have this dual motivation for that. One is One is this, as I said, it often makes sense to have a lot of renewables financially, maybe not 100, but some level of renewables financially. But the second is the kind of the leadership element. A lot of islands, and there's 1/3 of the United Nations member states are islands. So the Pacific, the Caribbean, Indian Ocean, African islands. Maybe they only make up 2% of the world's population, but they make up 1/3 of members. And so the Maldives, Mauritius, Jamaica, Barbados each have one vote, as does China and the US. So at the UN, they are put on this equal platform, and they do have a lot of clout. And so the Association of Small Island States within the UN does take an important voting block when it comes to these issues. And so a lot of those islands were saying, well, we understand that our emissions are negligible, irrelevant on the global scale, but we want to be able to stand there on the podium and say, well, we're leading by example. We've got our own commitments, and even though it doesn't make a difference really on the global level, that's our way of the political capital that we have, political opportunity that we have as islands, is leadership by example.
Yeah. Yeah, and the big thing too, and just coming from a Canadian perspective, is that renewable green tourism, or energy, renewable green energy is a tourism attraction. Just here in Canada, we've noticed that with some of the regionals and communities that are really touting their renewable and their clean energy and their climate change action as a tourism draw. So there is a big thing there, that there is a bigger and growing audience of people who want to go to renewable destinations.
Yeah, I think green branding for tourism is essential now. It used to be kind of a nice luxury, your top 5% of tourist ecotourism, but now even kind of standard package holidays, there is some level of expectation on sustainability standards. And so renewables is part of that. Obviously, plastics is another one. Ecology, biodiversity. There are various angles with that, but I think renewables makes an important part of that.
Yeah. So what's the appetite in the world for island countries transitioning to clean energy? How hard is it to get the right partner? Like, are you seeing, because of COVID, are you seeing a demand for a bigger demand, or actually more people inquiring about the services and the structure of island innovation? Are you seeing a peak? Are you spiking?
Well, I think the big problem for islands in terms of COVID was the dependency on tourism, which doesn't apply to all islands, but applies to many. The worst example was Aruba in the Caribbean, when 90% of their economy was tourism. But even in most of the other islands, it was anywhere from 40 to 70% or more. And so when that much of your economy is wiped out overnight, unfortunately, one of the first things to go is environmentalism. Yes. Because you're more worried about what's happening right now. And so all of these articles about, dolphins in the Venice canals, it's like, oh, well, that's nice, and it's great that you can see the Himalayas from Delhi for the first time in 50 years. Like, don't get me wrong, that is great, but is that a very, very short-term thing in the reality of we're going into one of the worst recessions we've known in anyone's lifetime? Is environment going to be one of the first things to suffer under that? On the flip side, a lot of people said, well, okay, the tourists are not coming for 6 months. This is our opportunity to get things right. And I think there is something to be said with that. It was an opportunity for the transition to happen. To what extent that opportunity was used is questionable, because understandably, people were worried about the day-to-day issues of having a meal on the table, providing healthcare, everything else. So you can't expect people to prioritize kind of some distant thing. And I think what is still unknown is, what will the tourism industry look like after COVID? And well, not after COVID, because COVID's not going anywhere, but after lockdowns and we can start to travel again. I mean, tourism is going to exist, of course, but it's going to look different, and we don't quite know what that means for the future.
Yeah, and one of the things, we had a guest on here, a strategist from Australia, a couple weeks ago, and it's one of the things that came to light, which was sort of eye-opening for us here in Canada, because in Canada we've got a a lot of different takes on how and what we should be doing things, being at who we are. But one thing I learned in Australia is 80% of their tourism is domestic. I did not know it was that high.
I'm surprised. Yeah.
Yeah, I was very surprised. And then I look at our numbers, and our numbers at tourism here in Canada is running around 30% was domestic. So I was looking at that and I'm saying, wow, what an opportunity for that. There's a huge opportunity. And it says, because in our past, I mean, the last 5 years, Canada's been focusing on China. The previous 5 years, Canada was focusing on the USA. What Canada has forgotten to do is focus on Canada. And COVID has put us in that spot now where we are focusing on Canada. We are seeing a spike in domestic tourism, but our domestic tourism, and it's funny, when you analyze and look what's coming to the forefront in Canada right now, the ones that are doing well are campgrounds, cottage resorts with physical distancing.
Same here, same in the UK.
Yeah, it's like whoa, and then the hotels now are the ones that are panic mode. The whale watching tours with 100 people in the boat, panic mode. It's just there's a shift happening. And in a lot of ways, it's a good shift. In a lot of ways, it has opened a lot of eyes on how important domestic is and the emergence of outdoor tourism is coming to the forefront. Yeah,
definitely. Although I think one of the issues that Canada always has I always understood was that it was cheaper to get to the Caribbean from Toronto than to the West Coast. So, but the cost of getting around Canada, that's the biggest barrier you have, right?
That's the number one beef we have here. I can't go from Vancouver to Calgary, and I can go cheaper from Vancouver to London.
Yeah.
It doesn't make sense. And that's a big beef. And that's the big thing we hear from clients, travelers, and everything is, I landed in Toronto, and then I figured I wanted to go to Vancouver, but it's $2,000.
Yeah. And whereas in Europe, I a couple of years ago I flew from Manchester to Oslo for £5. I can easily get to Barcelona to Lisbon for under £50. It's a different world. But just to go back to your other question, one of the things that we did really go into this year was the virtual event space. Yeah. Previously to this year, there hadn't really been demand for it. It was seen as kind of this sub alternative thing that was subpar, maybe not really that relevant. And what I've really found is the opportunity of virtual events is I'm hoping people are waking up to that more and more now.
Yes.
For me, it's like having this global outlook where you can have people in the same room, be more inclusive, not have the same faces in. It's not just about, obviously one thing is the cost of getting to your place, but also the difficulty for many people of getting visas to go to a certain place from developing countries, particularly. Even things like, a single parent that can't get childcare. By doing things virtually, I don't think virtual events will replace physical events in the long run. I think they're two different things that have different uses. Yeah. But people are opening their minds to see, okay, I get it. Now we're all a bit sick of sitting in front of our computers and not having that much social contact. But as things do become more normal again, people will be willing to go back to those events. And so obviously we built up that expertise in holding the Virtual Island Summit and then holding various webinars before that and various virtual online things. And now we're actually being commissioned more and more by other companies. We just held a big event last week for the Caribbean Biodiversity Fund with over 1,000 guests talking about conservation in the Caribbean. They commissioned us to put this event together. And so there's a lot of interesting things, I think, there. Obviously, the interesting tourism is not going to be replaced by virtual anytime soon. I think it's nothing that makes up for feeling your toes in the sand and walking along the beach or skiing down a mountain. But we are seeing new opportunities which are interesting.
And I think the positive side, you're not going to replace your toes in the sand going for a swim or hiking to a mountaintop. But what I think we are seeing as a change-making trend is that they are taking the time now to maximize their vacations by researching heavily more on the internet. And we're seeing social media now becoming more, instead of just a gimmick, it's actually becoming a search tool. and for the education of the tourism. So these are some of the things I think that are positive. And I'm with you. If we didn't have virtual, we aren't going to be meeting as many of these people around the world, these experts, the futurists, the strategists, people like yourself. We might meet you at an event when we come to one over in Europe by fluke. But the nice thing is on a virtual is you can get to know the person you want to contact prior to reaching out. So you can see if they're having the same mindset, if they have the skill set that you want to partner with, if they got that mojo that we're all looking for that connection, so we can build programs as a global force. I think that's a big benefit of the virtual.
Yeah, definitely. I think a lot of people said, oh, well, you can't recreate the targeted networking, the networking engagement that you would have at a physical event. And that's because, well, I don't like it if I go to what frames itself as an event and it's just me watching a video stream, because that's not an event. You've got to, there's a lot of people who have done events badly or have told people they're hosting an event, but it's really just a video stream. But it is actually possible to do some amazing things with engagement. I think if it's done right, you can actually engage your audience better. I'm used to speaking online more than I am in person. I'm much more comfortable in doing it online. And what I find is, if I'm standing in front of a room full of people, you don't get that kind of contribution as you're going along. And I really like that. If I'm doing a webinar and I can see the chat going and I say, okay, what do you all think about this? Have a quick look in the chat, get some feedback. You don't risk handing off your microphone to someone that grabs it and then goes on for 5 minutes about something that no one else cares about. You can do it in a nice way that actually gets audience contribution. Because I always think there are probably plenty of people in every room that I'm in who know as much or more about a topic than I am. So I shouldn't just stand up on the stage and talk. I should get the whole room's opinions and the whole room's insights. And so I think using those types of things, the technology in the next 2 or 3 years is also going to dramatically change. even last year, when I was looking for technology for the Virtual Island Summit, there were half a dozen options and none of them were that great. And this year, since the pandemic, every day someone is pitching me a new technology that they think I should use for their event. And a lot of them aren't that great, but a lot of them are really great. And it's sorting through them and figuring out which ones are going to be the next Zoom.
Yeah. And I think not even that, you've got all the programs and the platforms and the technology that is getting bounced off of Zoom. So they're taking it in a different direction from Zoom. I know here with our tourism marketing models, prior to COVID, they were all built for urban centers. Our small communities can't afford them. They didn't have the time, staff, money, or funding or skill set to run these programs that are built for Vancouver and Toronto. And that's hence where we brought our program in that takes none of that. No staff, no time, no nothing. Just create the content. We go in and train them. So I get that. And I think that's huge, that this whole new situation that we're finding ourselves, for yourself and people like us, I think we're looking at it a little different than most people. We're actually looking at it that this is an opportunity to grow our fields, to grow our messaging, our branding, where other corporates look at it and, oh, this is just a unwanted negativity. This is so different. This is so hard. This is so challenging. That is the difference I'm finding between the small entrepreneurial people, the people with the entrepreneurial mindset, opposed to the corporate mindset. Do you find that?
I mean, change brings opportunity, and I don't want to negate the horror of this pandemic. I don't think, and I know you're not saying that, and no one would.
No.
But every change, there is an opportunity coming in. And if you're a big corporate that is making millions, tens of millions, billions a year, well, you have your system set up. You don't want change. You want things to stay the same. But if you're an entrepreneur, you're looking for opportunities, and change is those opportunities. And I find that as a small business, we can move so much more quickly and jump on those opportunities that a large business would just take so long to work on. They're going to miss. And so I think any big kind of shock to the system accelerates trends that were already happening as well. And you saw that. I mean, a very different example, but when there's a natural disaster, I shouldn't say natural disaster because I'll get told off for that. Disasters are not natural. Disasters are caused by humans not preparing adequately. But when there's some kind of disaster on a large scale that affects a region, that is a change. That is a shock, and that can often accelerate economic trends that were happening anyway. So we are seeing this acceleration. There's going to be winners, there's going to be losers, like everything. But I hope that the opportunities and the benefits that come out of this will, in a small way, make up for some of the devastation that's come out of it.
Yeah. No, very, very good point. It's everyone looks and has everything. We're big on here is that everything is an opportunity. You just got to find how to look at it from a different angle. And I think that's the way to get through this. And I agree with you. No slight on the effects of this pandemic. It's devastating. It's so many words cannot even describe it. But yeah, we gotta come to realization of this, but it doesn't mean we sit down and lie down and take it and whatever. No, get up, fight, find a way through it, and different options. So really enjoyed our convo, James. Before we let you go, is there anything that you would like to share with our audience with Island Innovation and your virtual summit? And James, what would you like to leave us with?
Great. Well, I would just encourage your listeners, go to virtualislandsummit.com, sign up for the summit. As I mentioned, it's free to be involved, and it'll be a really amazing opportunity to meet with such a vast diversity of people from across the world, and hopefully learn about some islands you didn't know anything about before. I know that our website's been at the bottom of the screen, so that's great. Do feel free to get in touch. Check out our website. And I love Twitter, so at @Ellsmoor, you can find me on Twitter. And do send me a tweet and let me know what you thought of this episode. But thank you so much, Greg. Really interesting to talk with you, and thanks for the invite.
Yeah, and we've just put your Twitter up and your LinkedIn up. So is that the best way? Is that the best way to contact you? Is those two formats?
Yeah, send me a tweet, or LinkedIn is fine too. But
okay,
Twitter's fun.
Okay, perfect. So just so our listeners know, this is our friend James here coming to us from across the Atlantic. He has a summit coming up. And what's the date again of that summit, James? Maybe you can just tell us a little bit more about that, the date and times and how it works.
So 7th till the 13th of September. The idea is that we'll have a whole range of sessions. We're not expecting people to sit in front of their computer for the whole week. So there'll be 30 sessions across the week. Some people might attend one or two. Some people might attend half of them. You have to be pretty committed to attend 30 of them, because they'll be at all hours of the day to allow people in different time zones to take part. But if you sign up on the website, you'll be sent all the information in terms of how to access those. A really wide range of topics, from tourism to the circular economy to the oceans, biodiversity, and all of the sustainable development goals in different ways covered there. And we have speakers ranging from grassroots activists in the Scottish Islands and Papua New Guinea to the Prime Minister of Fiji, Prime Minister of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, the senator, actually Canadian senator for Prince Edward Island, is one of our speakers. So we have a whole range of the people on the ground doing things, right up to the policymakers making decisions at the top. And I think that's what we need to be able to make things happen. And it's all about sharing what's working well in other places and looking for opportunities to replicate or adapt those for the benefit of all islands, rural areas, and remote communities.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for James for joining us, Island Innovation. James, we will be in touch. Keep in touch. And James, we're looking forward to attending your virtual island summit, and we will try and get all 30 shows in. We have a team here. We can even delegate it out. We can all be there.
Fantastic.
Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Greg.
Thank you very much, James, and take care. And we'll talk to you. We'll talk to you soon.
All right. Thanks, Greg. Have a great week.
You too.
Bye-bye.